Hi everyone. Today, let's talk about stocks that moved. Then we'll talk about Ford investing in an EV manufacturing hub in Canada. Then we'll go over the economic calendar in case you forgot. Then we'll talk Fed futures. And then we'll talk Michael Jordan's shoes. Then we'll go over the charts. And then we'll look at my results for the day and my thoughts going into tomorrow's session. If you like trading stocks and options and making money, definitely like and subscribe. I make videos like this every single day that the markets are open, as well as Sundays. So make sure you hit the bell so you don't miss out on any future episodes. Welcome to the Portfolio Bulletin. Let's get started. So quickly going over some stocks that moved, talking about Bitcoin. Bitcoin was up 12%, and that pushed some of the companies that trade in Bitcoin up a little bit here. You can see Coinbase up 6%, MicroStrategies 6.3%, Marathon Digital or Mara up 12%. Basically everything benefiting from that Bitcoin run that we've seen here recently. Moderna fell after some weakness in their vaccine trials. Looking at Virgin Holdings, this is one I've been paying attention to. They've basically gone bankrupt. They're filing for Chapter 11 here, and they're getting delisted from the NASDAQ. That should shore up the NASDAQ at least a little bit. Definitely not a large company, so it hasn't had a major impact, but it could be helpful at least a little bit. WW International soared 60% today after it completed its purchase of Sequence, which is a telehealth platform, and got upgraded to buy from Neutral by Goldman Sachs. Definitely something interesting to watch. Tilray fell 8% after agreeing to buy Hexo. And then interesting here, Whirlpool gained 3.8% after the company was upgraded by Goldman Sachs. And lastly here we have Ford climbing 1.2% after its announcement of an EV factory in Canada. Speaking of that Ford EV factory, let's get some of the finer details. It's going to cost $1.3 billion, which is equivalent to $1.8 billion in Canadian dollars. They haven't given us a ton of details here. They say they declined to disclose the plant's expected production capacity or how many electric vehicle models the retooled facility will build. So right now we don't know a lot. It's just an investment here, but anything to do with EVs versus the grandfathered ICE vehicle is definitely going to provide some potential upside to a company like Ford, which doesn't really have the same kind of growth potential that we see in a company like Tesla. And to finish up here, they mentioned the plant will continue to build ICE vehicles until the plant's downtime next year, as the company's initiative to be able to build 2 million EVs globally by 2026. And lastly, for news, we have Michael Jordan's Last Dance shoes, which he gifted to a Utah Jazz ball boy, and it recently sold for $2.2 million. I don't really have anything to say about this besides the fact that it is absolutely ridiculous. The shoes do look pretty awesome, but I just can't imagine spending that much money on shoes. Moving over to the Fed rate monitor tool, you can see we're at 70% chance of a 25 basis points hike in May. That continues to trend up from 76.5 yesterday, and the previous week was 38.2%, so we're trending towards that 25 basis point hike. Obviously, this could all change tomorrow. We'll wait to see what happens. We'll definitely have to look at this after we get the CPI data, but keep in mind this is what the market is pricing in right now. And going over to June here, you can see 66.9% chance of a pause here at that same interest rate. So still pricing in a pause for June, assuming that we get that 25 basis point hike in May. And if we do get the unlikely case here with a pause, then we should expect a 25 basis point hike in June. So either way, 25 basis points, whether it's May or June, is the expectation right now. Moving over to the economic calendar for tomorrow, in case you didn't know or you missed any of the previous episodes, CPI is tomorrow. We have core and headline, month over month and year over year. Expectations for headline is a pretty decent step down. Expectations for core is basically flat, slight step up on the year over year, slight step down here on the month over month. Comes out at 8:30 Eastern tomorrow morning, 1 hour before market open. Moving over to the charts here, we're going to go through these fairly quickly. Not a lot has changed since the charts yesterday. I'm taking a look at the hourly chart. You can see we made a slightly higher high, and then we sold off right into the close and basically finished unchanged here. You can see that candle of indecision on the daily chart. Momentum continuing to step down. RSI still neutral, slightly bullish on the daily chart, but definitely weak here at the close. You can see how much volume there was in the last hour of the day. Now, this could certainly be people selling out of their positions prior to CPI. If CPI comes in bullish, then we could certainly see this continue higher. You do have to factor that in. Lots of EMAs and SMAs to the downside here. Overall, this is still an uptrend. Does look like we're in a bit of a topping pattern here, and that we're eventually going to see a breakdown to that 400-ish level. First level I'm watching is 405.29, and then just below that we have this trend that I I was watching, sitting down at about 480, somewhere in that zone, and then 399.25 just below that. So definitely some downside potential. If we do break out above this previous high, looking up around 414.69. Moving over to the NASDAQ here on the 15 and the hourly, similar thesis, fell into the open, rallied into the midday, fell into the close. Huge volume on the last candle of the day. People looking to get out of their positions, definitely bearish. Looking at the daily chart, you can see this trend line that I've been watching going all the way back to the highs in November, mark the highs here in February. And then once again here, it looks like we're marking the highs and starting to pull back. Definitely looks bearish going into tomorrow's session. Daily chart getting really close to a crossover on momentum. RSI definitely looking weaker here going into tomorrow's session as well. Overall, I would expect the NASDAQ to move lower unless we get a really dovish read on CPI. Moving over to the Russell and the Dow here on the hourly charts, you can see this long-term downtrend that we've had on the Russell. We're right at that level once again. We actually did close just above it, very similar to the tops that we had going back to the beginning of April. But then you can see we pulled back right at the end of the session. Strong rally though, and it did continue from yesterday. We're right at the 9 EMA as well as VWAP here on the Russell. Does certainly seem like this could go all the way up to the next high, up around 179.23. I would like to see it get above this 177.33 level. I thought we would close above that level, and you can see that last candle of the day definitely stopped that. Momentum starting to roll over. RSI got into overbought conditions just for a minute and then pulled back. So this does look a little bit more bearish going into tomorrow's session than it did yesterday. But this rally has still been very strong, and you can see a solid base going back to Wednesday of last week before we had this bigger move higher. So still very bullish, but slightly weaker today than it was yesterday. Otherwise, looking at the Dow here, you can see we got above this trend line, got above this previous high, got above the high going back to early last week, and now we're starting to go higher. Last candle of the day, obviously bearish like everything else, came down very close to retest this previous high, and I would expect that this is going to continue higher in tomorrow's session. Dow outperforming in the short term, Russell right behind it, and then we have the SPY and the NASDAQ in last place for today. Moving over to Apple and Tesla, you can see a lower high here on Apple, retesting that support line. I would expect this to break down here tomorrow. Momentum on Apple continues to look bearish, so below VWAP. Just looking to get below that 200 SMA and this support line. If that does happen, then we're looking down at 159.35 or 156.79 to the downside. Overall, bearish on Apple going into tomorrow's session. Tesla actually looked a little bit stronger, gapped up, pretty much went sideways, retested the next highest level here at 188.50, and then broke down from there. Does look bearish into the close, but just about everything does. Momentum, bearish, RSI, bearish. But you could certainly see this come down to 184 or so, find a little bit of support in there. But really, I'm watching 182.09 as my next level of potential support. Highest level of volume sitting at 185. Another level to watch there. Overall, pretty neutral on Tesla. Did rally here today, does look weak into the close, but it did get above all of the previous consolidation going back to Wednesday of last week. So like I said, maybe it finds some support in there and goes higher, but really I would be looking down at 182.09. Moving over to staples versus discretionary here, you can see staples finally broke out. Didn't get to $76, which is my next price target, but it's getting closer here. We're above these previous highs. We're retesting there, and you would expect this to go higher. It is losing some momentum, which is interesting. Lots of volume here right before CPI, just like everything else. But overall, staples still look strong. Discretionary actually rallied here a little bit today as well, but still has not come back and retested this area of supply. If it does get into this zone tomorrow, I would expect it to break down. 147 is the level to the upside, and then the 200 SMA back at these previous lows is the level to the downside. Overall, looks like the risk is to the downside on discretionary. Moving over to transports just for a moment, you can see we broke out, continued this massive rally. Momentum did fade, and RSI is overbought here. We also hit the 144 EMA on the 12-hour chart, closed just below it, and it does look like we might pull back here a little bit to support. But overall, we're above this major trend line now, and you would expect that if we come back into that zone, it's going to get bought, and then we could start to look to new highs here on transports, which is a little bit surprising considering the weakness in the markets. But the Dow is also going higher, so those correlating together does make sense. Moving over to stocks above their 50-day and 200-day averages here, you can see 50-day came up, tested that level and then got rejection back down to the 200. Does look like an island reversal type setup on this chart. Last time we got that, we got a pretty substantial pullback. So we'll see what happens going into tomorrow's session with the 50-day. Similarly, on the 200, retested this high going back to Monday. Didn't quite get to my resistance level at 61.21. Maybe 59.50 is a level I should watch going forward. I prefer 61.21 though, going back to this high from early March. Maybe we see a little bit of a push up, hit that level, and then start to pull back off the CPI data. But overall, this is a higher high on the 200-day average, which is a little bit bullish going into tomorrow's session. Looking at the dollar here just for a moment, you can see we pretty much chopped around. We retested that trend here on the daily chart, found a little bit of support at that key level. CPI comes in hot. Maybe we see the dollar rally. Comes in a little bit dovish here, then we can see this pullback and get below these previous lows, which should give equities a little bit of room to the upside. Moving over to JNK just for a moment, you can see it continued this rally, took out the previous high, made a slightly higher high, but sold off into the close, sitting at the 55 EMA here on the hourly chart. We're also above all the EMAs and SMAs back here on the 4-hour chart. Does look bullish looking at these previous highs. Area of highest volume, 92.30. Next level resistance, 92.50. Overall, looks slightly bullish going into tomorrow's session, which is definitely interesting. Moving over to TLT on the hour and the daily. Not much. Tested previous lows, found support. You can see that's the area of the highest volume here at 106.76. Similarly to the dollar, if we come in dovish, we should see bonds. We should see TLT go higher. Come in hawkish, this is probably going to pull back. For levels, we have 102.50 to the downside, area of highest volume sitting up at 106.92. We also have a little bit of volume here at 105.39 to the downside. To the upside, we have 109 right at the top, peaking above there. Then we have some upside to around 111 to 115. But right now, everything depends on CPI. Moving over to the VIX here on the hour and the daily chart, not much to add, went sideways, came close to testing that low, found a little bit of a rally into the close. Stuck in this zone, the one that we have been for a while now. Momentum still ticking in the bullish direction, which is interesting. Slightly bullish on the hourly chart as well. But of course, this is going to depend on CPI. Moving over to my accounts here, you can see I made just over $100, $42 in my IRA, $73 here in my individual account. The only position that I'm holding into the CPI data is this Russell position. I do think that Russell looks quite strong right now, and I didn't want to give up that position going into the CPI. Obviously, the CPI could affect this position, but I'm okay with these shares. I do think the Russell is going to hold up at least a little bit here in the short term. So we'll keep an eye on this one. If the Russell goes sideways, obviously I'll close this position. But right now, I think the Russell is in a better position than pretty much all the rest. Maybe the Dow slightly bullish, but overall the Russell is doing all right. Otherwise, I continue to look for positions in the NASDAQ if we can find some strength. But the NASDAQ really does look a little bit weaker here right now. And I might look for a position in the SPY since it has been outperforming a little bit here recently. Overall, CPI will present direction, but right now I'm still neutral on the NASDAQ and the SPY. Let me know down in the comment section what you think of all the companies that are doing things right now. Is Ford making the right move over to EVs, and can they actually compete with Tesla? Otherwise, definitely like and subscribe if you got any value out of this video, and make sure you hit the bell so you don't miss out on any future episodes. Of course, none of this is financial advice. This is all for entertainment purposes. Good luck in your trading and have a great day.